my name is Ted Verani. I'm head of business development for Wappier. And today we're going to talk about the art of mobile game retention. And before getting that topic, let me just introduce just a little bit a company called Wappier. Wappier, we offer an intelligent revenue management platform that uses artificial intelligence to analyze and predict player behavior. And then we take that information, we try to influence then using machine learning tools, specifically things like loyalty program, designed to get people to come back more often, some more time in the game, as well as IAP pricing optimization. So right price, right time, right location. But before we can even, so this session is not about a rewards program or how to better price your IAP, all important topics. Really before, I can even help you, or even before you, get too deep into that sort of consideration, you need a game that works, right? And by works, you need a game that already performs well on its own. And, frankly, that's no easy task, as I think, you guys all on the panel know, better than I do. But because, clearly it's a big business, that's in, right? Pick your favorite analyst report, $150 million. I just read, I think it was 2019. So, probably need to get updated on that. Keeps growing probably forever. But it's not an all boats rise industry, right? It's instead, sustainable success is it eludes most players, or company game developers rather too. And because hundreds of new games are coming out each week, and capturing, holding attention of players is getting harder and harder than ever. So with that in mind, I think the primary question we really want to answer here together is, how do mobile games from top mobile developers like yourselves, retain users long enough and consistently to maintain your position, top downloads, and top revenue in these charts in this competitive landscape. And in short, we're going to talk about how you've mastered the art of mobile game retention. So to answer that question, I'll introduce each one of you folks. Get right into it. So we are lucky to have three experts on the subject itself, all running games and the game leaders from within their company. So Patrick McGrath joins us, who's just left recently with Wooga, that's where we work together, but you are about to start running the Berlin studio for 10 Square Games. So congratulations for that, and welcome.
Thank you.
Rimmy Spanjer, who's here from Hyper Hippo. So the venture series of idle games that you've done, for running for a long time and had great success with. So I think you just launched one, Adventure Ages. Is that correct? Congratulations on that too. And then finally, also Nacho Marin, who is the game lead, game owner for the Asphalt series of games, very popular series of games from Gameloft. So welcome everyone. So today's discussion, what we want to do is we want to answer the question of retention, but we'll start with some of the fundamentals around retention, but then also get a little into academic, but spend most of our time on more tactical tools and tips. We want, folks to come away from having kind of some information, good understanding in terms of how to get people coming back more often into game and sticking around longer and for sustainable growth. So let's start with the first question, which is, something fundamental. And I'll ask all of you soon. So I'll first start with you, Nacho, is, what are different types of retention that you think about and why?
Okay, so the first thing that comes to mind is to check on the classical retention. So how many people is coming in certain days since an initial date. And based on this, you always look at short-term retention, long-term retention. So it's something that you keep kind of daily checking to see the health of your game. And it's something that is a standard in the industry, so you can benchmark versus other games in other genres or inside your own genre. So I think it's a healthy and basic KPI to keep track of when talking about. You've
captured the classical retention. So Remy, what are some other types of retention maybe that you think about, and why?
There's a couple of ways to looking at it. I would build on exactly what Ignacio said in terms of sometimes I'll break it down on a session-to-session basis, day-to-day basis, week-to-week, because each is going to have a different impact on the way the players are experiencing your game. But if we're trying to look at some of the more interesting ones, once you get into social retention, how much are people actually engaging in individual features or engaging with features specifically with other players? Those can actually be really insightful as well, depending on how your game is structured.
Okay. And Patrick, anything you'd like to add, or just maybe?
Yeah, for sure, looking at engagement as kind of a proxy leading into retention, especially around features, is interesting. But another way to measure different types of retention is kind of the more popularized, at least lately, NER. So looking at like the different kind of segments of your user base. So like new user retention, I'm blanking right now. Current user retention rate, and then React user retention rate. So
what is reactive retention?
So that's like people that have left the game, and then you get them back into the game, and how are they retaining after they had some whatever amount you would consider lapses. So this helps you really understand like any type of marketing or CRM to try and reactivate some of your churned players. So
you're also looking at new user retention, but then the reactive, so people have to understand the behavior. Cool.
Exactly. It just starts to look at the strata of like when we talk about retention and DAU, like, okay, who are the players? And then of course, like if you have the capabilities, looking at any type of behavioral segmented retention is always interesting because you have different types of players coming into the game. And depending on your game, some might just retain much better than others. So this is always interesting if you have the capabilities.
Okay. Well, let's talk about also what so Nacho, back to you. What are some of the most important retention KPIs that you look for? I understand that might can depend on type of games, but your experience, kind of what's most important for you, KPI.
I think it depends also on the stage of the development of the game. Like different if you are soft launching the game or you're already live 3 years. You want to look at different things. So I'll start talking about the soft launch. Something that you look often is the negative spectrum of the retention, what we call it the churn, because you want to really make sure the onboarding funnel and the first steps, the churn is reduced. So you have as many people surviving through the onboarding or through the tutorial to the game to make sure there is no critical technical issue that is making people drop the game very soon at certain steps like the age gate or a certain tutorial step that becomes too boring or too heavy to go through. So that's a very important, let's say, that's in that stage.
Yeah. Remy, anything? What else are you looking at?
I'll give the kind of fundamental simple one for me. The one I always care the most about is D1. I know it's the simple answer, but it's because everything you can do to a player, which is a horrible phrase, every way you can support a player, every feature you can give them, it's kind of meaningless if they don't like your game. And that tends to be the I like your game KPI. It's telling you, yes, it's worth coming in the next day. It's actually a little bit dangerous if you put a lot of heavy D1 features and daily bonuses because you might be getting a skewed result. That's what I like to build on, but I will give honorable mention to retention on monetized players, because that can that could be a really big red flag for what I would consider unhealthy spend habits in your product. If someone spends and they quit, that's actually a pretty big deal. It means that probably they had a bad experience. They didn't enjoy what they were offered. Either it was the price point or ultimately the value of what they felt they got was down. So either of those values can be very important for ultimately measuring with your games in a good direction.
Yeah, and then okay, that's good. Retaining and monetization of players. So and looking for unhealthy too. Patrick, we could change it up a little bit. How has it changed? Did the because you're not brought up how really sort of the earlier stage kind of stuff too, and obviously we heard about D1, but what you look in terms of retention can change over time within the game, right? From soft launch to later. Do you want to add any sort of thoughts on that topic with KPIs or anything else you want to add what folks just said?
Yeah, I mean, +1 to all the comments so far. I mean, certainly looking at the life cycle of the product itself, the game itself, and understanding like, yes, in soft launch, D360, maybe not so important, right? D1 is always, one of these indicators, and, you can have a good idea of your retention once you gain enough data and extrapolate that out to however far you want to take that, right? Using June's Journey as an example, after 3.5, 4 years of data, like we understand how many players are going to stick around by day one, and depending on how that fluctuates. And then, of course, like just looking at specific games, you do have a very tight flattening of the curve at some point. And I think this is always an interesting kind of KPI to look at as far as retention. So whether that is, day 7, day 10, day 15, I think each game probably has its own where that curve like really starts to flatten. That slope's just really, when you zoom out, you always see like the really exponential drop, and then it just kind of goes in a, I shouldn't say straight line, but like certainly a lower decay rate. So to me, that's always an important indicator of the game's overall health. If things start to change around that. So I mean that's all I would add, or at least
like
to the life cycle question.
D365.
I mean, like at certain points, like I mean, we were looking at 720. Like when you're starting to really up your user acquisition, like you really have to understand the full life cycle of your game. And I think everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, but just specific genres, and certainly many of the larger studios are looking at these kind of 10-year franchises, right? Like these, I think Zynga calls it forever franchise. Everyone has their kind of coined term. And so when you start having this idea that your players are going to stick around for 10 years, I mean, D360 is just like kind of the beginning, right?
Nacho, you've been running Asphalt for how long? Now?
Well, if we count Asphalt 8, we've been running seven or 8 years already.
Yeah.
So but Asphalt, I think the brand has like 15 years or 16 years already. So
15 years. That is awesome. I mean, so yeah, how do you think, you talked about early, so then how do you think about retention for a game that's been running that long? Or anything else to add, to that? Or we could stick, any else you want to add, or just
what I wanted to ask the guys is like, what happens to me is like we always focus on these classical KPIs, day 1, day 30, day 14, whatever. But after day 120, you stop looking at it. Okay, you look at it to calculate lifetime value and all this stuff. But honestly, you start looking at this data long term, and then you have to look for other KPIs to measure this retention of the players that already went through this initial phase. And this is what I think Patrick was mentioning earlier about the engagement. I think that's a very valuable metric to check on this later stage, to see if these people that have stayed so long, if they are playing more than before, less than before, so you can value if they are going to drop sooner or later. So you have to change a bit the KPIs and go into more elaborated segmentation of your players and see how they behave differently and keep tracking them different ways.
Cool. All right. So that makes sense. I want to get into some of the tactical stuff too, and I really want to start talking about kind of ideas for getting out of D1 retention. But we're still in the kind of academic sort of phase of this conversation, and that's obviously when you're designing a game too, and maybe a lot of people don't know this, but deep insights into player behavior also sometimes begins using some of the classical literature, right, in terms of behavioral psychology with things too. So anyone can jump in with certain thoughts around sort of any favorite cognitive bias or behavioral psychological models that you like most when designing a retention system.
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Sure. So it'll be a hard time actually like proving that this is grounded in sufficient psychology, but I'll talk about it is a psychological.
It is being recorded, Remy, just so you know.
Yeah, if this is fact checked, it's not going to check it. So, but what I will say, and it's a bit of a speech, so forgive me. Understanding the difference between extrinsically motivated goals and intrinsically motivated goals, which is to say goals that you put in the game, extrinsic, and goals that a player will generate on their own. It's something that's extremely undervalued in video games, and it can be the kind of the death of you. So really quickly, every player is going to have their own reason for why they're playing. It's not going to be about reaching a level or some currency. To give a quick example, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, all I wanted to do was wield two-handed swords. It was the coolest thing I could think of. So I played, got to that point. It was just as amazing as it sounds. And then I quit an hour later with 80% of the content of the game left because that was my own intrinsic goal. So it is a tricky thing to build into your game, that understanding. But you always have to stop and think about what are the actual things that my players are going to want and be motivated towards? And am I making it clear that these exist in my game? Am I making them kind of clear carrots so a player can see them, interact with them? Really quick example, Pokemon. every time you play Pokemon, if you ever play it or you go back and look at it now, you'll realize that the coolest and like most evolved and fanciest Pokemon are always shadowed to you early on. You'll beat a trainer with the coolest one, or someone will stop a natural disaster, and it becomes the thing players want, even though it's not technically listed anywhere as a specific goal. And it tends to be the reason people push. So that's a very important one for people to consider, is what are people going to be telling themselves that they want in your product?
Yes, I mean, that's really kind of along the lines of conditional reinforcers, right? Like, obviously, you don't want to be too like bang them on the head with, some legendary Pokemon or mythic or whatever it is, right? But like, you certainly reinforce that, hey, that's the cool thing, right? And you're not going to get that for a while, but there's this other cool thing. And this other cool thing, and you're giving this like, love and praise and rewards along the way, kind of breadcrumbing the player through this. But one that I see used fairly well in some genres and not others, but I think this is really just going to become more prevalent as it gets refined, but the near miss effect. So this is like when you're gambling, right? Let's say that you're like at a roulette table and you have all your, I don't even know the number, like black 30. I don't know if it's red 30, whatever, right? But that ball starts bouncing around and it lands on 29. The like actual neurochemistry going on, you nearly feel like you won because you nearly missed, right? And so, of course, games, it's not this zero sum, like, oh, I lost, it's all gone. There's a lot more padding on that loss, but I think this is something that loot boxes, which is always a topic,
Always controversial, but good.
do fairly well in some genres and some games. So I think that this is something that more and more games and more genres, I think, are going to start taking on as far as like core and meta gameplay, having this kind of trigger in the game, because it is fun, like if it's done right.
Yeah, the fine line between gambling, loot boxes, and
yeah, this is like it's always like the bad word to bring.
I
up.
know, I love you bring it up. So it's a bad word, maybe, and certainly under some, people in Belgium might be sort of taking a hard look at it, but but still, it's it exists because it works there, and if you message it well, you do it. So okay, well, that's a perfect transition to sort of talking about more the tactical side of things too. Loot box, and let's go to you, Nacho. First is I like to think of this as a desert island question, right? So because instead of your top favorite tactics too, what would be your one top retention mechanic that you'd want to that you'd like to put in a game to make sure you get people coming back?
I like to think about this from the mobile perspective, like talking about mobile games, which is something that
mobile games, yep.
Yeah, it's something that you bring with you all the time. So for me, it's very important that these sort of mechanics that create a habit on the player to make you come back, and it builds a routine in your brain that makes you trigger action after another. So you have an action, you get a reward, and this triggers another action. So you get to do some sort of routine tasks every day that is kind of automatic for you. You don't realize. And you can find this very well in Supercell games where you get a push notification at the same time and you remember, I have to trigger the game. And it automatically, you don't even think about that. You trigger the game, you find yourself claiming already a reward. And then you find yourself playing another race or another match just to fill that empty slot that you left yourself. And you make this routine on your head and you do this every day at the same time while you do commuting, you are in the bathroom, whatever you can do with your mobile phone, and this creates a habit that is driving this retention every day because you don't even think about that. It's something that becomes part of your day-to-day. And yeah.
Good. Yeah. So habits, day-to-day kind of fundamentally kind of games. And Rimmy, with you, can you think of any specific tactics that you think about when you want to just keep people coming back? There's a lot of things you can throw into a game, but what would be your go-to?
I'll try not to go too far off the reservation here, but the way I approach is not just like throw a daily bonus in there or throw whatever. Okay. That works, but I worry about designers hearing that kind of thing and they just copy and paste a feature in. From the goals that I would recommend, I always think that retention tends to be most effective if you think about it from a 3-timer perspective. And so what I would try to do is have one timer that's essentially set by the game. maybe that is a daily bonus. Log in every day because this is when you get your chests. This is when you have an energy refill, whatever that is. So that's going to do your initial session setting. The player knows that exists. You also want to have one timer that's set by the player. Because again, going to intrinsic goals, that's always going to be more powerful. If the player's going to sleep and they set an 8-hour timer, or they just finished their session, they set a 4-hour timer, they're internally setting their own clock for when they want to go. And the last would be a variable timer. That can kind of surprise the player. So if they do decide, okay, I'm actually going to log in earlier, 2 hours instead of 4 hours, you want to make sure that they still have some gameplay. There still is a fun, exciting thing that they can come back to. However you satisfy those three, it tends to lead to a more healthy perspective of there's always 1 to 3 reasons why a player's thinking about the next time to log into your product, not just randomly stumbling on it at some point.
Okay, cool. No, good. And I appreciate your caution about, you don't want to just like have a menu of sort of, here's my tactics too, but, but it's still think about, other tactics, kind of what, can work, and how, and not necessarily every game and every sort of experience too. So Patrick, what, any tactics that you want to make sure like, I guess Rimmy brought up D1 retention earlier being kind of important to you. Patrick, to you, then what tactics do you make sure to get people coming back after that first day?
Well, I mean, we just talked about timer mechanics. So one thing I would add is the strength of giving the player at least the perception of agency, especially with the variable timers. And I think Supercell, like if I look at Clash Royale, they did a really great job of this because they have different types of chests with different types of timers. And so you're really allowing players to kind of have this agency of, okay, I'll check back in 3 hours, and I can do this a couple times during the day. And you have this short-term mechanic, and then, I'm going to be busy today, 8-hour chest, right? Or if you have this 12-hour chest, I'll wait till the end of the night, right? But as far as day one, I think that there's just many different ways in which you can get a lot of timed mechanics, but really it's like clearly communicate like what this value proposition is, right? Because if I'm a day one player, boy, I gotta like digest, core loop, meta loops, and now you're talking about, some multi-dimensional timer feature that, if you don't clearly communicate this value and how it works, like you might be shooting yourself in the foot. And then one last thing I would say, because we already talked about, being able to foreshadow, which maybe we didn't. Super important, foreshadow, but also make the player engage, right? I think one of the problems with the copy and paste for a long time, especially with timer mechanics, was this, just give them something for coming back. And well, is what great, your retention looks good. But then if we look back down into that engagement, you have people just coming in, checking and leaving. And they have that one login per day that, your retention's looking fine, but people aren't actually engaging. And so there's different ways that you can have these features and mechanics, have players go to the places in which you have to, start the timer, or, hey, I got this reward. I have to go to the store to actually use it to open up this star box, right? And so you're also not just conditioning coming into the game, but to these different features and different areas that you want players to be engaging with.
Okay, makes sense too. And I mean, you're kind of going, I think it's kind of leads into, so other thing that leads to abandonment after first day is sort of just, the game is just too difficult, right? I mean, if like, right off the bat, you're having I'm not having fun because the game is just too difficult for me too. So how do you address that? Or how do you know where the game is sort of in a difficulty spot? Maybe, I don't know, Nacho, do you want to take that one first?
That's what I was talking about earlier. Like you have your onboarding funnel broken in small steps. You can see at what step you have more churn of people, how many people is dropping at that step, and you can always tweak it. And it's true that difficult games make people churn. So that's why sometimes if you want to maximize your onboarding funnel, you have to make it more easier. And some people that likes challenge might complain about this. This game is too easy. But it's overall, it's usually preferable to make an easier onboarding for people to advance as much as possible. What remains to be seen is also if the people that would churn because it's too difficult, if they wouldn't have churn anyway later on, because these are already most of the time people that is not your core audience. So
yeah. Patrick, you were kind of leading into it already. Did you want to add anything? And I kind of cut you off there a little bit. Yeah.
Like 100% agree with Nacho. Like, it's always tough, but you do have some, I guess logically you would have some amount of your churners, especially when it comes to difficulty, that would churn regardless. Setting up these tests is no easy feat in themselves, but even looking at June's Journey as a game that you actually cannot lose, like there is no loss condition, right? And still, you get complaints about difficulty and, oh, this item was too hidden in a hidden object game, right? Like, okay. And when you see, when you get this type of, kind of subjective responses back from players, I think, if this player was to churn, it's just not quite the player and the core audience player that would probably stick around for a couple of years, right? And when you're looking at these longer term games, this is always kind of that kind of balance. How much can we press players, feed them with a fire hose and get the core audience to stick and filter out the ones that will end up just sticking around and not spending, because
how do you get
this gets very complicated, because if you have a social system, you definitely want these free players sticking around.
What are some ways to balance difficulty? You're starting to, just
there's
maybe too long. Any fast thoughts in terms of ways you might balance difficulty? Or
I mean, really, from game to game, this is gonna totally vary, right?
All right. I think
I could throw out one thing for difficulty.
Please.
It depends on whether you're actually talking about this is a hard challenge in the game or whether this is kind of a progression gate. So that's one thing to consider, is if the reason people are struggling with it is because some people have blown past that point. They did all the side quests, classic joke, but some people are just under leveled. It's always worth considering having kind of dynamic systems that are going to actually look at the player's current state of their game in order to determine, say, what the stats of the enemy are. If you're level 73, great, he's level 73 as well. That tends to be one of the easiest balancing mechanisms, but the reason Patrick, I think, was kind of not jumping into it is because usually it's because this specific system is hard. It's difficult to dodge this sword swing, not because you're under leveled.
Yeah. Makes sense. No, good, Ed. Well, let's just stick with your next, because so I think Nacho mentioned earlier about the onboarding process itself too. So and obviously one way of having a smooth onboarding process is a easy to understand tutorial, right? Let's get into that. What are some ways that you think, when you think about, do you do tutorials in your adventure series of games, and what are ways you think about in terms of improving a tutorial process?
I mean, they're a bit counterintuitive. You have to assume no one's going to read anything. That's always the first rule. You're going to put text. 1% of your people are going to care. The funny thing about tutorials or fatuis for some user experiences is that you always have to remember that the person needs to be able to just as easily intuitively figure this out on their own. I tend to try to draw as little attention to it as possible. If there's a thing I know they can't play their game unless, like, if you're just mashing buttons and ultimately you could succeed, go as light on the tutorial as you can. If you think there's a system that literally a player has to take a separate action, like they need to choose to go to another menu or they need to choose to do something counterintuitively, one, I'd question your game design, but two, that's where you're going to want to come in with a helpful arrow. And frankly, arrows, I would say, have been historically the most effective tutorials, whereas, you can argue glows, whatever, but, anything that's going to be text, anything that's going to be lengthy, are going to ultimately kind of bite you in the end.
Okay. Nacho, anything you want to add about that? Do you need to do tutorials in your racing games?
You always need to do tutorials, but they aren't necessarily evil. Like, the best tutorial is the one that doesn't need to exist.
Right.
Anything that you can solve through user experience and UI that can be conveyed intuitively, as Remy was saying, that will solve it. People will appreciate it, and your retention numbers will go up for sure.
So that's okay. So what I'm hearing is that, really ideally game design should come in play first, and, you don't need a tutorial, right? People can get in there having fun right away, but then you're going to have a tutorial kind of sort of as a safety valve, right? And to backstop there, for you there too. With that in mind, do you give rewards for completing tutorial process? Yes or no?
I mean, you can. It depends. Again,
Yeah.
if I'm going to throw a roll at you, it's always reward an action the player kind of wouldn't take anyway. Like the reason you reward is to push the player to get to a certain point. So if your game is intrinsically rewarding, like let me say, I'll use the scary word again. If you're teaching a player how to use a loot box, do you reward that loot box opening successfully with another loot box? Now you're getting into a weird situation. But if it's tricky, if it's time consuming,
more loot boxes. When in doubt, loot box. Okay. Fair enough. All right, so I think we beat that one, too. And Patrick, unless you have anything to add, how do you think about daily login bonus? In terms of deciding how much to give away. It's another sort of tactic to get someone to come back, more often.
I mean, I've kind of seen quite a few different approaches, at least on the games that I've been on, and this really comes down to just what reward space you do have. What can you feasibly look at least as far as the supply demand within your game, and how that grows based on per session or daily incomes. So I mean, I can't really throw out like every game should give out 5% of because I don't think it works like that. Just like I look at these RPG games and the scalability of their games, they could give out so much, and it's so like the value proposition is so strong to just come in and check in every day and come and engage every day, but that's because you have to open 50 boxes to get that next like really great character that's going to come out next week, right? Yeah. And so you do have to just hoard and have these massive values where other games just might not be able to do that economically.
Anyone else have any thoughts along there with different genres that you guys worked on?
For me, the daily login thing is one interesting feature that I think has been evolving over time quite a lot. Like the early times of free-to-play games, I would tend to agree that the daily logins were something that were booming and were making your retention grow. Nowadays, I don't think we're interested in people just logging in. We want them to make actions in the game, want them to get engaged into the game. So, for example, in Asphalt, we made a conscious decision. We don't want a daily login bonus. We have a daily task system. So we get into creating this routine of habits and tasks that repeat every day at basic level. And then you can extend this into more elaborated missions, more mid-term or long-term.
Yeah, no, good point. Good. Okay.
I mean, it's really nice if you have both of them, right? Yeah, the daily login, just because it's so easy. There's some like tasks here with varying degrees of difficulty. Like, I'll just do this one. And then you get into that MMO loop. Just this one.
Yeah. And then you throw a loot box. And you
That's right. But sometimes there's a bit of oversaturation of features. We want to give too many things to the players. And I think sometimes we end up with too much crowded screens. Like, for them to be able to play the game, they have to click through so many things that might be counterproductive at some point.
Okay. I was going to ask this question, but I think we kind of covered it earlier too. But so I was I think I was going to ask about how you scrutinize retention through a game's life cycle, but I think we pretty much covered that earlier too. Let me switch it. So one is when we, generally, when I'm talking to people, I find, I'm talking about, most of my experiences for the last few years have been working in pricing, right? How to, better price stuff too. Often I have a conversation with someone and say, yeah, Ted, I'd love to talk to you about pricing, but, really, even before you even think about monetization, I need to get, fix my retention, right? Which is, of course, today's topic, right? The most important thing with the game too. But are there scenarios, and, I guess Nacho, I'll stick to you and I'll come back around to everyone else. Are there scenarios where you think about monetization simultaneously with retention? And I understand it might be depends, too. So, well, Remy, I haven't heard from you in a while. You want to, take this one?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I'll give the super short answer and then the complicated one. I mean, at the end of the day, people the longer they stay around, the more likely they are to spend. There's a lot of relationships about when your conversion points are, right? They convert on D3 and you have bad D3 retention, your game's in trouble. More interestingly, for the combination of the two, I would say that the industry is not as aware as it should be about how monetization affects the way player behavior works. You can, without forced obsolescence in your game, which means like if I buy the best sword ever, I spend $2, and then that means I don't need a new sword for 3 weeks. That's actually creates a problem. So being aware that ideally your system allows monetization to basically just pick up a player and move them forward into a different section of progression, like they basically fast forward 2 weeks. But you have to make sure that that experience doesn't break it for them. Like, is it still fun? Is a player who's only been here for 2 days buys a conversion pack and then they're kind of 2 weeks deep into your game? Do they have the understanding that they need? Have they actually missed out on the fun parts and now you've dropped them into the grind? There's a lot of relationships there that are tricky because it's variable depending on how much someone spends or spends not at all. And you want to make sure that, at the end of the day, the person who spends should have the best time in your game. That's really what you're trying to show. Is it's more fun if you just spend money in your game, and that fundamentally needs to be true, or you're going to lose the, as we said, the paying players.
Okay, yeah. I think Patrick, if you want to add, I understand it's also very much can be genre dependent, so it could very much be sort of a thing of it depends, the type of game. But Patrick, is there any scenarios where you might think about monetization earlier, or do you need to, or is it just as for you as a sequence, just get retention right, get out of soft launch, then start thinking about monetization?
No, I mean, you absolutely have to think about them hand in hand. And I mean, Remy explained it quite well. I mean, what you're ultimately selling outside of cosmetics is progression, right? I mean, classically, that's what it is. Candy Crush stops you at a level and then says, you're going to play this 137 times unless you pay me $1, Now, of course, other games are a little more refined in the way that they propose the value of that progression. And again, this is outside of cosmetics. But to your point, like, it depends. Like, of course it depends. Look at hyper casual, right? They're looking at retention, like long-term retention for them is D7, right? Like, they just need people to show up X number of times over like 3-4 days. And that's how they monetize, because it is ad rev based. To another point, like a lot of other games throughout the industry, almost all genres are now really, it's just prevalent to have some type of ad revenue monetization scheme within your game. So of course, like, this ties directly with retention, right? Because every day you get those couple of cents ARPDAU from people just watching ads. So of course you want them coming in every day for the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Anything you want to add, Nacho? Or we think we covered it pretty well?
It's fine. I think for me, retention and monetization are egg and the chicken. What comes first? It's difficult to say. What is proven is that when people make a purchase in your game, the retention usually increases. If you have a well-designed game, that means that paying users always have a better retention because they made an actual conscious commitment to your game. They are purchasing a good, they expect to use and maximize their use on your game because they love it. So it's a commitment, and it's usually much better than non-paying users retention.
Yeah, just from our side, we've seen kind of good results, improvements, retention with pricing, right? Which you normally would think, what? They think it's like, you don't think of pricing as a retention mechanic, but like, you give someone a first purchase discount or something to get them, like you said, invested in the game. Okay, I bought something, but also having more fun, right? Now I bought something, I'm going to the next level. Now I actually appreciate the value of like, oh, actually, making a purchase is helpful, from my kind of experience too. You're going to get to repeat purchase too, and and stuff too. Or similarly, we've seen with global pricing where we, by optimizing prices in different countries, then people who are just kind of more play, but then they didn't have spent, but then it becomes more affordable. Again, they get invested in the game, and we see overall healthier game economy. So too.
I think. Sorry, just one thing to add, but because what you touched on there, I think is really important. Like, that connection of the value proposition and creating that sunk cost fallacy. Like, I've invested and I feel really good about this investment, so it's harder for me to leave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And then, and of course, important part of the pricing too is sort of, getting it right for, what is the value, right? It's got to be, I got to get value from it too. So But we can save that for a long topic for another panel discussion, and then we work on. Let's talk about. So another important thought about retention is sort of communications, right? In terms of like, so yeah, you want to get people to come back in your game to kind of get things in, so how do you communicate with people too? So, maybe Rimmy, we'll start with you. So what are some preferred ways that you have to communicate with players to get them to come back into the game?
Maybe I'll start with the caution for, I don't know, maybe depending on where the audience is.
Okay.
Data should always be your first communication channel in terms of how the players are telling you whether they're not they enjoy your game, simply because every other channel we're about to talk about in terms of players being able to give you feedback are very risky and dangerous in terms of vocal minorities. People are far more likely to speak if they are upset than if they're just completely content or happy. So I'd start there. Always trust the data. Try to have enough data that's going to give you a clear picture of what players like or don't like. But once we get into the other way, like the way we like to talk to players, ideally, you're talking to players through your game if you can, because that's the only place you can guarantee you have 100% of your players. Your social channels are going to have a percentage, et cetera. But just, I do want to caveat the mean statement I started off with, which is you do still need to listen to what your players are actually telling you qualitatively, because that's a great place to be surprised. Data is never going to really surprise you. It's just going to be up or down, and that's going to make you have to figure out what's going on. But unusual scenarios are my favorite thing to get from the communities. I actually wanted this, but you gave me this, and I never would have approached it that way. That's the kind of the epiphany generator for me, is seeing a way a person loves your game may be completely different from the way you expect them to engage with it.
Yeah. Would you have any preferred communities? Do you prefer Reddit, your own forums, Facebook, Twitter?
It would be hard to say prefer, because I think you get a specific different audience from each. Reddit tends to be pretty hardcore. They're the ones that usually care enough about your game to deep dive into it, so they'll give you an interesting perspective. Your game reviews are going to be probably the most casual way that you'll get communication for players. And yes, some of those will just be like, this sucks, but some of those will have real gems. So just trying to understand which one of those communication channels is going to get you which perspective is pretty helpful.
The meaningful "this sucks." Yep. So yeah. Any how about you, Nacho? Any thoughts of you guys about building community or how you communicate with players?
Yeah, totally on what Rimmy just said. In the case of Asphalt, like I think we've gone talking about the tools themselves that we use. Through the time, we've been evolving a lot. Like we started with forums from Gameloft to join the community there and explain and hear their feedback. Also push them the news. Now we work with Facebook, with Twitter. But something that is very trending last times is also matching with the audience that is a very young audience for the racing games, is Discord servers. So this is some kind of a live chat that you can have with the community. You can have pollings there. You can hear them. It's very dynamic and it's very up to date with them. So this is something that keeps evolving with time, depending on the audience. But right now, that's the one we are using the most.
Okay. Chat, communicate. Okay. How do you, so maybe taking, so this kind of continuing that with another question, I'll go to you, Patrick, too. But Nacho, also feel free to jump in. How do you identify then these community leaders from the forums or your chats? And once you have, then how do you kind of leverage this engagement in order to sort of positively affect retention for the whole game, and impact other players? So more than just feedback for game design, but how do you kind of take some of that community sort of involvement or feedback, or identifying leaders to sort of impact other players, or is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, if you have the benefit of having a dedicated community manager, this makes it much more easy, especially even just like growing and kind of curating the content that is within a community channel, forum, page, whatever you're using. But they tend to let like that they're a leader within the community. There's always, whether it's self kind of governing mods like within the community. I think it's very easy to see like who's really active, and especially with the tools nowadays, they really can give you a lot of granular detail on, this person posted 200 times in the past week. Great indicator that they're really active within the community and people might respect them, and they might really understand your game. And I think that it's on us to like really leverage that and start to create these kind of, sub communities, like where you can group some of these like really, really, I would call them VIP players, and not VIP from spend, but just like from an engagement, if they're spending great, but like really they just have a lot of game knowledge, and this can be leveraged.
Yeah. And what are some ways you engage with them directly to try to get some of that knowledge, or to sort of get them to influence other players?
Yeah, I mean, directly with them, within this group.
That community manager you're mentioning,
Yeah, I mean, of course, they're talking to the community manager. With a lot of these, I've been directly in these groups, chatting with them, kind of picking their brains on, just nothing specific, right? Like, we're not asking them what to do next. We have our own ideas, but then kind of having that validation and allowing us to get some type of reading from these very vocal players that just have a better understanding than the vocal minority, and have, I guess, a little more skin in the game because they're investing so much time. But
Got it.
certainly like getting a lot of feedback from them.
Got it. Okay. Nacho, anything else you want to add, or
You will be surprised by your player community. There is people that is crazy about your games.
Yeah.
People that creates tons of content, and for us it's a pleasure to help them and support them. For example, in Asphalt we have a YouTube creators content program to help them grow their channels. So we pick people that is really invested, that they show you they love to the game. So we validate that the quality of the content is awesome. So then we try to promote them and empower them for the rest of the community, because this is great for them as creators, and also for the community. They can learn and get up to date with the latest news these guys are sharing on their own.
Mm-hmm. Good. Is there Remy, you do anything different, or seeing anything differently, Remy?
I mean, I throw out a couple small things. One, the fans and the communities are always going to be better at hyping your game than you will. If I come in and say, "Hey guys, I've made the best game ever," versus you meet someone on the streets like, "You have to play this," or a friend, you're going to get very different values to what you think that information is. But keeping an eye, and good community leaders will do this. There's a lot of people that can be turned around. A lot of people who will say something terrible about your game. It's actually because they're really passionate about it, and that's an interesting thing. It's a dangerous space. It's why I don't want this job. But if you're willing to dive in, talk to those people, and frankly, a lot of them just want to be heard. And I've seen some of the most vocal, excited fans are the ones that originally said, "Hey, I hate this part of your game. Why would you do this? You've ruined it." Someone comes in and says, "Hey, actually, that was a mistake," or it's on leading on a better path. And some of the responses you'll get will blow your mind of, "Oh my God, thank you so much. I really appreciate that you looked at this." And then they're lifelong fans, and my favorite thing is if you see a Facebook page or something, or whatever fan site, and you see those same people responding to other critics and be like, "Trust them, they're doing their best. I asked that same question. Here's why." It's always going to be more powerful than any really positive thing that you can write out yourself.
Okay, cool. Let me think. Patrick, let me go to you. So when because then you're just about to start your new job, and with 10 Square, so you're gonna be thinking about new game, in terms of coming out. I'm curious. So, obviously, whole industry's been kind of upended by iOS 14, right? In terms of the deprecation of IDFA. And usually we talk about it in the context of marketing and kind of, user acquisition, right? This is more of a, product design question. But that said, marketers, they're going to have to now start thinking about CPM buys, to where, a game with consistent DAU becomes, I think, always been important, but all the more important. And, because you can't just buy your way for new players, right? As easily, I think, as you would have been able to do in the past. With that in mind, does that sort of change your calculus, your internal thinking in terms of the type of game that you might develop, knowing that you need to have sort of a game that retains right off the bat?
I mean, I would say that I think, and I'm no IDFA expert at all, but I would say that the more broader the game, the easier IDFA is on the game itself, right? Because what it's really going to hurt is, these very niche games that were essentially through user acquisition, like whale hunting, right? Like you're just trying to find these really high spenders, get them into your game. And the ROI makes sense if you're able to do that. Now, if you don't have that reading, you're kind of just flying blind for a very niche product. And so, looking at it, I don't think it would, like, if we're talking about making new games, I am not going to let IDFA determine what my next game is. Like just flat out.
Do what you normally do, right? Make a fun game, make you enjoy.
Exactly.
Yes.
I think that the industry will figure out and adapt to this.
Yeah. And again, I'm just, maybe it doesn't make sense. And anyone saying anything, the same. Just you guys make already game now. Yeah, Nacho.
Yeah, I'm not making a new game right now myself.
Yeah.
I'm holding us for time, but I think that well, I wouldn't also let IDFA influence my choice. There are many other things to determine that. But it's true. Like imagine I had to release now a game around soccer with or without a brand. I think a brand would help me counter a bit the effect of the DFA, which will make it difficult for me to get users. So anything that I can get organically, it will have an impact if I want to get a brand on board or not, because it will bring me extra downloads without having to purchase them that will be impacted by this.
I hear some people talking about like developing kind of what in other industries we'd call loss leaders, right? Some games that might lend themselves to organically don't download, but then they probably don't monetize it well, but then they become feeder games into other games, right? So
you mean within their own network of games?
Yeah,
that's always a weird game to set out to make, though. Like,
I'd
love to hear that pitch, right? No one's gonna want to play this, guys, but hear me out. It's very strategic.
Yeah, exactly. Got a really sucky game that you're gonna probably download.
Maybe I can throw one other thing for people to keep in mind, which is, ultimately this is gonna help. Affect marketers a lot more than it's going to affect us. So maybe just talking from the game dev side specifically.
Clearly.
Never kind of forget the way the players are going to find your game. It's a constant conversation you seem to have these days. It's so easy to go from the developer side. So we're looking at Sensor Tower and we're checking out data and we're comparing, but like players don't do that. Never forget that they're opening an app store. They're typing in a word probably to find a different game. And you need to think about how they're actually going to find yours. Because that marketing is something you're actually choosing. You're defining your marketing position when you choose your genre, when you choose your theme, your systems. So just make sure, have a better understanding than ever of who your actual core competitors are, of the type of players that are going to come from these games, that even though you might not be able to target them as well with user acquisition, knowing how a player is going to see them, knowing that the comparisons a player is going to make in their heads, is probably going to be more important than ever, as organic may end up being ultimately a larger source of installs in the future.
Yeah.
So sorry, I just have a quick question for Remy.
Yeah.
So you're saying like these secondary kind of like performance marketing has always been king, right? This is where you can like really spend the most money for user acquisition. Like what you're talking there is like ASO, right? Like optimizing the app store for these keywords. But do you see these more traditional marketing tactics, like actually just commercials, right? Whether it's online or TV, like, do you see that is also something that is almost just as important as you were talking about with like ASO?
I'd be speaking out of turn if I pretended I had the expertise to know whether that was going to be true. But what I would say is, even before ASO, even before you get to the point that you have a product on the market and you're trying to effectively, get people to install it, the choice you make, like if you decide to make your game themed to, to cars, right? Like someone in the room has thought about this a lot. You're immediately setting yourselves up, not just in terms of the type of people that want to play your game, but you're choosing your competitors at that moment. So it's just really important throughout the entire dev cycle, in my mind, even before you get to ASO, know that you are setting yourself up in the market. When I choose these systems, when I choose this theme, this is my new user base. And then just kind of understanding how those people are going to interact with it. And maybe the answer is some less conventional marketing means, like those people tend to watch racing shows. I don't watch racing, I'm sorry. So maybe a commercial in there is the path. But just truly understanding, what are the people that are going to like my game have played these other 7. So what are their expectations going to be if they're searching for one of these other games and they see mine? Why would they choose mine over theirs? Because those are all development questions. Those aren't actually marketing questions that you can layer on later.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll try last one. Let me just thought of this question. And this can be really be fast answers. Could be saying like, no, Ted, that's stupid. Why would you ask that question? It's a fine answer too. But because this whole conversation we've been talking about, retention and how it's more important. Heck, the whole title, session is about the art, of mobile game retention too. Is there a scenario to where you do not worry about retention? And I just, like I said, kind of thought of it, and like, again, the answer could be no, of course not. We always worry about retention. But anyone have something in this scenario? Is there a scenario where you may not worry about retention? I mean, Patrick about hyper casual. I guess they also too. They just, for them it's D7.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they
They
care
still
about
worry
it,
about
but to a certain point, right?
Right. It's just a little shorter horizon, I guess, in that case. Yeah. Okay. Just like I said, I don't know if anyone else had any thoughts and comment too, but well then, how about another one that parting, just so like that. How, because you guys have all been in the business for a while now, how has retention mechanics changed over time? Does anyone have a sort of a pithy sort of thought on that?
I wouldn't say that the systems have changed that much, especially because there's been this weird shift where everything used to be on Facebook and then mobile slowly adopted it. So it was a lot of identical systems. You can make a lot of cases. I'll leave that to the other two gentlemen. But the thing I would note is actually that the players have probably changed the most in terms of education. At this point, we've taught half the world's population what levels are and what all these different gates are. Like, there's a lot of things that are just familiar. If you say daily bonus, the fact that 2 billion people know what that is these days is pretty significant compared to 10 years ago. So I would look at it from that perspective of what are people used to, what can they expect, and what can you get away with because there's a higher level of education.
Right. Well, you bring a point to, and now particularly it's like kind of hybrid versions of games too. So it's like, if you like match 3, yeah. All right. How about Nacho? What about asphalt, long game, long running? How about, have you seen something? You've been able to.
What I was saying is that, I was saying earlier that the daily logging we're mentioning again is a good example because it has been becoming more sophisticated as we've learned with the market, with experience. We're going more sophisticated with just log in and get the reward, to log in to do something to get the reward, to log in and stay and embed this retention with the monetization. We have now in this season pass, this battle pass that is an industry standard that is embedding together retention and monetization. And this is like an next step. Like 6 years ago, this didn't exist. So I think in a sense, systems have been evolving and getting more sophisticated, more precise. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, because that's like almost like a subscription itself, right? It is a subscription, right? Too, but it's a type of subscription too. So, without, the old days subscription was just like a gate, at the front, you got to pay this too, but no, you can still play. So that's cool. Good. I think, Patrick, anything else to add, or I think we've
I mean, yeah, I think both gentlemen here hit it on the head. It's really like the Western market has matured and really caught up with APAC, at least in my opinion. One of the things when we look at retention and monetization, like at least as a feature that I would show, the prevalence has kind of shown where we've grown to is just a basic battle pass, right? Because you pay money and then you have to essentially engage a whole lot, which is retaining, right, over a month or 6 or 8 weeks or however long that is. So it's exciting to see, and like this is nothing new, right? It's just become more prevalent because the maturity of the markets almost expect this. Like all these other things that we're talking about with these appointment mechanics, these daily logins, all of this stuff. Yeah, whatever. Like every game does it. And I think this is kind of the attitude of all these more mature game players, or at least on mobile. So it'll be interesting to see, what the next step looks like past battle passes, because I'm not the biggest fan of them.
You're not the biggest fan?
No, I mean, look, they're really good if they work for your game, but I've just seen a lot of games just like, let's just layer this one on in there. Like everyone's doing it, and it's kind of a half-ass attempt.
Fair enough. Yeah. But I like them because they're self-selecting in terms of willing to pay and stuff too. But as opposed to the loot boxes going full circle to early content, which has got that kind of gambling kind of component, right? So at least you kind of know what you're going to get. But
Ted, you love a loot box.
I do. Whenever I love any monetization tactic, that. So too. So that's also why I like battle passes, because it's retention plus monetization. But anyway, gentlemen, thank you very much. This has been a great conversation. I think we could probably keep going on and on and on. So, but we probably should close this off. So I want to thank you all very much for your time, great insights, and I look forward to seeing you all in person someday, whenever we can.
Yes.
Yeah,
Soon.
and actually sharing a stage. All right, guys.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Pleasure. Take care, everybody.
Bye.